Before diving into the video, did you know that over 80% of you watching right now aren't subscribed? Your one like and one subscribe means the absolute world to this channel and helps us keep going. Hit those buttons real quick and let's get into the video. Chapter 1. The Delivery at the Door. When the doorbell chimed, Arthur was standing by the kitchen counter slicing tomatoes. The sharp blade pressed through the skin, letting sticky red juice pool on the cutting board and coat his fingers. From the living room couch, Elena called out asking if he could get the door. His hands were dripping with juice, so Arthur answered back without turning around, asking if she could grab it instead. A few seconds ticked by before Elena spoke again in a noticeably flat, even voice, telling Arthur he needed to step outside. Arthur set down the knife, wiped his hands dry on a kitchen towel, and walked into the hallway. A woman was standing right in the open doorway. She wore an elegant white sundress, long hair draped over her shoulders, and bold red lipstick on her lips. Between both hands, she clutched a thick brown craft paper envelope. It was Grace, his ex-wife whom he had not seen in 3 whole years. She looked thinner than he remembered, her cheekbones sharper beneath makeup carefully blended to hide the dark circles around her eyes. The moment her eyes found Arthur, her lips curled into a perfectly rehearsed smile. "Hubby," she said softly. Elena was leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed, tilting her chin toward Arthur with a look that plainly asked for an explanation. Only then did Grace seem to register Elena's presence, glancing over her for a couple of seconds before turning her attention straight back to Arthur. Grace raised her chin slightly and held the envelope out toward his chest. She announced with complete confidence that she had kept her promise and returned right on time to remarry him. Her tone carried absolute certainty, as if she truly believed Arthur had remained paused in the exact spot where she walked out 3 years ago. Arthur took a deliberate step backward, putting distance between them. "My wife doesn't let me accept gifts from other women," Arthur said evenly. Grace's smile instantly froze on her face, the warmth vanishing from her eyes. Arthur gestured toward the woman beside him, introducing Elena as his wife and explaining that they had married the previous year. Elena stood comfortably in an oversized gray lounge shirt and house slippers with no makeup. Yet her effortless calm made Grace's elaborate appearance look completely overdone. Grace clenched her fingers around the envelope until her knuckles turned white, accusing Arthur of hiring someone just to make her jealous. Arthur cut her off cleanly, asking if she had bothered checking the official marital registry before coming to his door. Elena stepped in with steady politeness, suggesting Grace come inside and sit down rather than stand out in the hallway. Rattled by Elena's calm composure, Grace took an instinctive step backward, clutching her envelope tightly as tears welled in her eyes. She looked at Arthur and asked with a shaking voice if he had truly forgotten what she told him 3 years ago. Chapter 2. The 3-Year Bet. Arthur had never forgotten a single second of that summer night 3 years earlier. Their mutual friend Leo had organized an old classmates' reunion party at his house. Arthur had initially preferred to stay home, but Grace had insisted on going because her childhood best friend, Marcus, was attending. Marcus was the lifelong friend Grace constantly brought up and prioritized, always shutting down Arthur's discomfort with the excuse that they were practically raised as brother and sister. The party was packed, noisy, and littered with empty cans as someone suggested a game of truth or dare with a spinning bottle. Eventually, the bottle pointed straight at Grace, and Marcus was the one selected to give the dare. Marcus held his drink loosely, smiling with the calculated expression of someone who had planned his move long before the party started. Looking right at Grace, Marcus dared her to divorce Arthur and be his girlfriend for 3 years. The entire living room went completely silent, and Leo's playing cards slipped from his hands onto the table. Arthur sat paralyzed, expecting his wife to yell, throw her drink, or call Marcus out for crossing a line. Instead, Grace lowered her eyes, thought for barely 3 seconds, and casually agreed. Leo and several others jumped to their feet in shock, trying to stop her and reminding her that marriage was not a joke. Grace brushed their hands away, finished her drink, and turned toward Arthur without a hint of guilt on her face. She reached over and patted Arthur on the shoulder like a child, telling him to wait for her for 3 years and promising she would return to remarry him under any terms he wanted. Arthur sat with a knot in his throat, unable to utter a single word while Marcus sipped his drink without looking at Arthur once. The divorce papers were finalized with astonishing speed, with Grace signing every line without a second of hesitation. Outside the registry bureau steps, Marcus was already waiting in a white car, waving to her from the open window. Grace slipped into the passenger seat and drove off into the summer heat without looking back toward the building a single time. Arthur sat on his living room floor that night, surrounded by her leftover belongings, completely hollowed out until the sun came up. Chapter 3. The Reality of a New Home. Snapping back to the present, Arthur looked at Grace as she stood in his doorway, repeating that she had fulfilled her bet down to the exact day. She pushed the envelope toward his chest again, offering to let him write whatever conditions he wanted into their remarriage agreement. Arthur kept his hands at his sides, refusing to touch the paper. Elena pulled the front door open wider, inviting Grace to step inside out of the afternoon heat. Grace walked into the entryway with stiff steps, demanding to know when Arthur and Elena had gotten together. Elena answered plainly that they had been married since the previous June. Grace's face went pale as her fingernails dug into the wooden doorframe, claiming that Arthur had broken his promise to wait. Arthur looked straight at her, reminding her that he had never promised anything. She had simply ordered him to wait while he sat in stunned silence. Elena turned and walked back toward the kitchen, mentioning that she would finish prepping the tomatoes while the water boiled on the stove. Grace watched Elena move through the apartment with the effortless confidence of someone who had lived there for a very long time. She scanned the living room, noticing the matching mugs on the table, the paired slippers by the shoe rack, and a gentle reminder note written in Elena's handwriting stuck to the fridge. Elena returned from the kitchen with a glass of water and offered it to Grace, who was too shaken to take it. Grace turned back to Arthur with a trembling chin, asking him when he had finally stopped waiting for her. Arthur sat on the couch and answered directly, the exact second she got into Marcus's car outside the registry office. Grace's tears finally spilled over, dripping onto the envelope in her hands as she asked why he hadn't tried to stop her back then. Elena sat beside Arthur on the sofa, quietly brushing the back of his hand with hers in silent reassurance. Chapter 4. The Unraveling Excuse. Grace sat down on the sofa across from them, clutching the craft envelope tightly over her knees. She tried to explain her past actions, claiming that back in their sophomore year of high school, before she had met Arthur, she had confessed her feelings to Marcus and was turned down. She claimed Marcus had threatened to expose that old embarrassing confession at the party unless she agreed to the dare. Grace argued that she agreed to the divorce simply to protect that secret from Arthur. Arthur leaned back on the couch, completely unmoved by her explanation. He asked her what made her think he would ever care about an innocent teenage crush from years before they even met. Arthur pointed out the harsh truth. She had not divorced him to protect their marriage. She had done it to protect her own pride. He added that deep down, a part of her had always wanted to try dating Marcus, and the dare was merely the convenient excuse she used to pursue it. Grace shot to her feet in anger, letting the envelope fall to the floor. She shouted through her tears about how much misery she had endured for 3 years while counting down every single day to return. Elena spoke up softly, reminding Arthur that Grace had been standing too long and should sit down so she wouldn't faint. The sheer composure in Elena's voice took all the anger out of Grace, causing her to collapse weakly back onto the sofa cushions. Arthur noted that while Grace was busy living through the consequences of her choice, she had never considered how he was forced to survive the heartbreak she caused. Grace covered her face with a tissue, asking if things would have stayed the same had she rejected the dare that night. Arthur confirmed that if she had been honest, they would still be living happily together, but she had chosen a different path, and actions have permanent consequences. Chapter 5. The Truth of the 2 Years. Grace sat in silence for a long time before she finally confessed the reality of what happened after she left. She explained that during their first year together, Marcus treated her well, taking her on vacations and posting about their romance online. By the second year, Marcus became distant, frequently ignored her calls, and started spending time with a female coworker he claimed was related to his company's executive. By the end of that second year, Marcus packed his bags, told her he was completely bored of her, and walked out the door. Arthur noted the truth in her timeline. She had only been with Marcus for 2 years, not the 3 years she claimed to have sacrificed. Grace admitted that after Marcus abandoned her, she spent the entire 3rd year living alone in shame in a tiny rental, convincing herself that Arthur was waiting just as miserably for her return. Arthur asked if she had searched for news about him during that year of isolation. Grace admitted she found his new address, but never checked the marriage registry because she assumed his love for her was unconditional. Arthur brought up the day of their divorce outside the bureau steps. He reminded her of how she fastened her seatbelt, looked at her phone, and drove away without looking back in the rearview mirror once, while he stood in the burning sun for 30 minutes. He asked her why she ever believed he would spend his life waiting for someone who didn't even care enough to look back once. Grace pulled her knees to her chest in defeat, utterly crushed as Elena rested a comforting hand on Arthur's shoulder. Chapter 6. Rebuilding from the Ashes. Arthur looked back on how he had spent those 3 years putting his life back together. The first few months after the divorce were spent in a daze, barely functioning at his desk and staring blankly at computer screens. Eventually, he gathered every pair of shoes, cosmetic product, and leftover item Grace had left behind into trash bags and threw them away for good. Leo came over soon after, refusing to let Arthur waste away in self-pity. Leo brought a business plan for a smart home system startup, offering to secure the financing if Arthur took charge of the technical engineering. Arthur threw himself into the company, working around the clock, sleeping on a folding cot in a cramped office, and steering the startup through near bankruptcy. By their second year, their flagship product launched successfully, and they secured a major round of venture capital. It was during the investor audit that Arthur first met Elena, who had been sent to conduct due diligence on their operations. During their first review meeting, Elena noticed a framed photograph turned face down on Arthur's desk. She advised him that carrying unresolved emotional baggage would cloud his focus, telling him to either face the picture properly or throw it away completely. That night, Arthur took the photograph out of the frame and tore it up, finally letting go of the past. Over the following months, Arthur and Elena's conversations shifted from professional reviews to late-night chats and shared dinners. For the first time since the divorce, Arthur felt the hollow space in his chest begin to fill with genuine warmth. Chapter 7. Marcus's Admission. As Grace sat quietly on the sofa, the doorbell rang once again. Elena answered the door to find Marcus standing in the hallway, dressed in a button-up shirt with his sleeves rolled up and holding a bag of fruit. Marcus walked into the apartment casually, stating that Grace's mother had told him she left the house dressed up, so he came to keep her from humiliating herself. Marcus looked around the room, offering a casual congratulations to Arthur on his marriage with the same arrogant smirk he had shown 3 years ago. He told Grace to pack up her papers and stop clinging to someone who had already moved on. Arthur cut straight to the point and asked Marcus if the truth or dare bet 3 years earlier had been planned in advance. Marcus shrugged and openly admitted that the entire party game and the bottle spins had been completely rigged. He confessed that he had never actually had genuine feelings for Grace. He simply resented Arthur since high school, when Grace started dating Arthur right after Marcus rejected her. Marcus stated bluntly that the dare was never about winning Grace. It was solely about proving he could take away whatever Arthur possessed. Grace sat paralyzed with shock, the blood completely draining from her face as she realized she had ruined her life for a man who viewed her as nothing more than a tool for revenge. Marcus dismissed the entire past as foolish youth and turned toward the door to leave. Before he could step out, Arthur told him to take his bag of fruit with him, stating that his wife did not eat food brought by outsiders. Elena picked up the fruit bag and handed it back to Marcus with polite indifference. Marcus's confident smile finally vanished, and he walked out of the apartment in heavy silence. Chapter 8. The Weight of Regret. After Marcus left, the room fell into complete silence. Grace sat collapsed on the sofa with her makeup ruined by tears, whispering in disbelief over how thoroughly she had been manipulated. Elena brought a warm, damp towel from the bathroom and placed it gently on the coffee table, telling Grace to wipe her face. Grace looked up and asked Elena why she didn't show any anger toward the ex-wife making a scene in her home. Elena calmly replied that Grace belonged to the past, and since the past cannot be changed, her only focus was on living her present life well. Grace slowly wiped away her makeup, exposing the tired lines and heavy circles around her eyes. She mentioned how Leo had cursed Marcus out for 20 straight minutes after the party, while Grace had defended Marcus and insisted she agreed willingly. Arthur reminded Grace that she had always treated him like a permanent backup plan, foolishly assuming that safety nets never walk away. He told her that backup options can move on too. Grace looked at the framed photograph on the shelf showing Arthur and Elena smiling together in a blooming field. She picked her crumpled envelope up from the floor, brushed the dust from the paper, and accepted that her past marriage was gone forever. Chapter 9. Handing over the past. Grace walked slowly toward the front door, stopping with her hand resting against the brass handle. She looked back with bloodshot eyes, confessing that if she could turn back time to that party, she would have flipped the table over instead of agreeing to the dare. Arthur gave a single nod, acknowledging that the past could never be undone. Before opening the door, Grace paused and asked Elena if she was good at cooking. When Elena replied that she was decent, Grace began sharing Arthur's daily habits. His stomach is sensitive, he cannot drink cold milk in the morning, and he frequently kicks off his blanket during winter nights. Elena looked at her steadily and gently replied that she already knew all of those things. Grace offered a small, self-mocking smile, thanked Elena for taking good care of him, and stepped out into the hallway for good. Elena walked over to the sofa and sat beside Arthur, taking his hand into hers. Arthur looked at her and asked about the habits Grace had just listed. Elena explained that she had noticed his weak stomach long ago, had already stopped buying cold milk, and set a 3 a.m. alarm every night just to pull his blankets back over him. Overwhelmed with gratitude and relief, Arthur pulled Elena tightly into his arms. Elena rested her head against his shoulder, teasing him that he was squeezing too hard, though she wrapped her arms around his waist just as tightly. In the kitchen, the pot of water continued to boil loudly, but neither of them rushed to check it. The hollow, aching space that had haunted Arthur for 3 long years had finally been completely filled with real, enduring peace. Chapter 10. Where It All Settles. Arthur never saw Grace again after that afternoon. Leo mentioned in passing months later that Grace had moved far away to a southern city, working an ordinary administrative job, renting a modest apartment, and adopting a cat. News about Marcus spread quickly as well. His relationship with his executive colleague fell apart within months, and his business was soon ruined by a massive contract lawsuit. Life in Arthur and Elena's home moved forward with quiet, steady joy. One evening, while Arthur was taking dry laundry off the balcony line, Elena walked out holding a warm cup of milk. She playfully asked him if he remembered what day it was, teasing him when he incorrectly guessed their wedding anniversary. Elena reminded him that it was the 2-year anniversary of the first time he had brought her homemade dinner at work, a bowl of warm tomato and egg noodles. Arthur smiled, folding a fresh shirt and draping it over her shoulders while promising to make her an even better batch the next day. Leaning against his shoulder under the city night lights, Elena softly told Arthur never to open the front door for other women again, insisting that only she would answer it. She added with a laugh that he needed to practice peeling her apples properly so she wouldn't have to send them back to be redone. Arthur laughed softly and rested his forehead against hers in the cool night air. The empty hanger on the balcony line swayed gently in the wind, making a soft clinking sound like a life that had finally settled exactly where it belonged. Chapter 11. The next horizon. The months following the anniversary on the balcony slipped by in a comfortable, steady rhythm. Arthur and Leo's smart home startup grew beyond their initial projections, requiring them to double their engineering team and lease an entire floor in a downtown high-rise. With the sudden influx of success, their modest apartment began to feel just a little too small for the life Arthur and Elena were building. One Sunday morning, while sunlight poured over the kitchen counter, Elena circled a listing for a spacious suburban house with a sprawling backyard and a wraparound porch. She slid the tablet across the island to Arthur, resting her chin on her hands with a quiet, hopeful smile. Arthur looked at the photos of the sunlit living room and the large empty bedrooms, instantly visualizing where they would put a new bookshelf and a proper dining table. He didn't hesitate for a second, kissing the top of her head before telling her to schedule a viewing for that exact afternoon. Walking through the empty halls of that house, their voices echoing off the fresh paint, Arthur knew this was the blank canvas they deserved, a place entirely their own, untouched by any ghosts of the past. Chapter 12. The rival bid securing their company's future was not without its trials, as a massive tech conglomerate soon attempted to undercut Arthur and Leo on a vital municipal contract. The stress of the bidding war brought back memories of their earliest days, forcing Arthur into long, grueling nights hunched over architectural blueprints and code repositories. Elena never complained about the late hours. Instead, she became his quiet anchor. When Arthur came home at 2 in the morning, his eyes burning from blue light, he would find a plate of warm food waiting in the microwave and Elena reading a book on the sofa, refusing to sleep until he was home safely. She reviewed his financial projections with the same sharp, brilliant scrutiny that had first drawn him to her during their investor meetings. Elena pointed out a critical efficiency flaw in the rival conglomerate's proposal, giving Arthur the exact leverage he needed to refine his own pitch. Armed with her insight, Arthur and Leo walked into the boardroom the next morning with unshakable confidence, entirely dismantling the competitor's strategy. Chapter 13. Echoes and indifference. The aftermath of winning the municipal contract brought a sudden wave of desperate subcontractors looking for a piece of the project. Among the stack of proposals left on Arthur's desk was a severely underbid offer from a struggling logistics firm, a company recently acquired by Marcus in a last-ditch effort to save himself from bankruptcy. Leo stood in Arthur's office, staring at the company name on the folder with a raised eyebrow, asking if Arthur wanted the satisfaction of crushing the bid in person. Arthur looked at the folder for only a moment before shaking his head. There was no anger left in him, no lingering desire for revenge, and absolutely no satisfaction to be found in Marcus's ongoing downfall. Arthur casually tossed the folder into the rejection pile and told Leo to send the standard automated denial email, treating Marcus exactly like any other unqualified vendor. The ultimate victory wasn't seeing Marcus suffer. It was realizing that Marcus's name no longer held the power to disrupt even a single second of Arthur's peace. Chapter 14. The winter storm December arrived with a fierce, unexpected blizzard that paralyzed the city's transit systems and buried the streets in knee-deep snow. Elena was stranded at her downtown investment firm, texting Arthur that the trains were halted and she was preparing to sleep on a couch in the break room. Arthur simply replied, "Stay put," and grabbed his heaviest winter coat. He spent 2 hours navigating the treacherous, icy roads in his four-wheel drive, the windshield wipers battling heavily against the relentless whiteout conditions. When he finally pushed through the revolving doors of her office building, covered in snow and shivering, Elena dropped her laptop bag and practically ran into his arms. She scolded him for taking such a dangerous risk, her voice tight with worry as she brushed the melting snow from his shoulders. Arthur wrapped his cold hands around hers, smiling through his chattering teeth as he told her that a little snow was never going to keep him from bringing his wife home. The drive back was slow and silent, but the warmth radiating from the passenger seat beside him made the freezing storm outside feel entirely irrelevant. Chapter 15. The celebration by the end of the year. The municipal project launched without a single glitch, propelling the startup into a massive valuation and securing their financial future permanently. Leo rented out an upscale rooftop restaurant to celebrate, inviting the entire staff, the original investors, and their families. Standing at the head of the long table, Leo raised a glass of champagne, his voice catching slightly as he recounted the days they slept on folding cots and ate stale instant noodles. Leo turned to Arthur, publicly thanking him for being the brains, the endurance, and the absolute backbone of their success. But Arthur deflected the praise, raising his own glass to Elena instead. He told the crowded room that a man can only build a strong foundation when he has someone holding the ground steady beneath him. Elena's cheeks flushed a deep, beautiful red as the room erupted into applause, and beneath the table, she intertwined her fingers tightly with his, resting her head against his shoulder. Chapter 16. Blank canvas, moving day into the suburban house marked a profound transition, trading the lingering memories of the city apartment for the smell of fresh cedar and open space. They spent their first weekend unpacking boxes, ordering takeout, and sitting on the bare floorboards of their massive new living room because the furniture delivery was delayed. Elena wore an old paint-stained t-shirt, laughing as she tried to assemble a complicated wooden bookshelf while Arthur read the instructions upside down. There were no remnants of grace, no old artifacts hiding in the closets, and no shadows from 3 years ago waiting to ambush them. Every single item placed in this new home was chosen together, representing a life built on mutual respect and genuine love. That night, they slept on a mattress on the floor of the master bedroom, the moonlight streaming through the uncovered windows, wrapping them in a quiet, undisturbed serenity. Chapter 17. The unexpected news spring brought a gentle thaw to the city, but Elena had been feeling unusually exhausted, falling asleep on the sofa before 8 o'clock and skipping her morning coffee. After a quiet Saturday morning visit to the doctor's clinic, Arthur sat nervously in the waiting room, mindlessly flipping through a magazine he wasn't reading. When Elena finally walked out, she didn't say a word. She just stood in the hallway with tears pooling in her eyes and a small, trembling smile on her lips. Arthur dropped the magazine, his heart slamming against his ribs as he crossed the room and pulled her gently toward him. She whispered that they were going to need to convert the guest room into a nursery. The sheer weight of the moment brought Arthur to his knees, burying his face in her hands as he wept openly with a joy so profound it washed away every remaining scar in his heart. He was going to be a father, and the family he had once thought was permanently broken was about to grow into something infinitely more beautiful. Chapter 18. Building the nursery the next few months were a blur of joyful preparation, transforming the spare room into a warm, sunlit haven painted in soft shades of sage green and cream. Arthur took a step back from the company's daily operations, leaving Leo at the helm so he could be present for every ultrasound, every doctor's appointment, and every midnight craving. He spent an entire weekend stubbornly assembling the wooden crib, refusing to let Elena lift anything heavier than a decorative pillow. One evening, while folding tiny yellow onesies, Elena looked up at Arthur with a thoughtful, quiet gaze, noting how far they had traveled from that first investor meeting where he couldn't even look at a photograph. Arthur sat beside her on the nursery floor, placing his hand over her growing stomach, and told her that he wouldn't change a single moment of his past. He realized that the betrayal, the pain, and the lonely nights had all been strictly necessary because every agonizing step had led him directly into her arms. Chapter 19. The arrival. The first snow of winter began to fall on the crisp morning Elena went into labor. The hospital room was quiet save for the steady, reassuring beep of the heart monitor and the hushed, encouraging voices of the medical staff. Arthur never left her side for a second, holding her hand tightly, wiping the sweat from her forehead, and murmuring words of love as the hours stretched on. When the final, breathless moment arrived, the room was suddenly filled with a sharp, piercing cry that completely stopped Arthur's heart. The nurse gently placed a tiny, red-faced baby girl onto Elena's chest, wrapping her in a warm hospital blanket. Elena looked down at their daughter with exhausted, tear-filled eyes, then looked up at Arthur, her smile radiating in absolute, pure light. Arthur kissed Elena's forehead, his tears falling freely onto the blanket as he touched his daughter's impossibly small fingers. In that sterile hospital room, looking at the two most important people in the universe, Arthur knew his life was finally, irreversibly complete. Chapter 20. Full circle. A year later, the late afternoon sun cast a warm golden hue over the sprawling backyard of their suburban home. Arthur sat on a woven patio chair, a cold drink resting on the table beside him, watching the scene unfold on the soft green grass. Elena was sitting on a checkered picnic blanket, laughing brightly as their daughter, Lily, took unsteady, wobbling steps toward her outstretched arms. The scent of blooming jasmine drifted through the air, completely erasing the bitter memories of a stifling summer day outside a registry office 4 years ago. Arthur walked over, scooping Lily up into the air and spinning her around until her bright, infectious giggles echoed across the yard. He sat down on the blanket next to Elena, who leaned her head against his shoulder, just as she had on the apartment balcony, entirely at peace. Looking at his brilliant wife and his beautiful daughter, Arthur closed his eyes and breathed in the quiet perfection of the moment. The shattered man who had once sat on a cold living room floor was gone forever, replaced by a man who had weathered the storm and finally found his way home.